Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Data Talks speaker series. I hope you've had a decent first half of the semester. Today we have with us Etaoin, who is from Mastercard. She works as a strategic program management. Would you like to introduce yourself to start off?
Sure, thanks Ahmed, and thank you for having me. I work in, as you mentioned, strategic program management in Mastercard in the commercial section. So we work with all of the commercial customers such as Citibank, Bank of America. I think you're familiar with them, Ahmed. So I'm a technical program manager, and I can go into what that is, but that's my current role at Mastercard.
Brilliant. So thanks so much for coming on this evening. Can you tell us a little bit about, you obviously have a lot of experience in Agile development. You have a lot of certifications in it. Could you tell us a little bit about Agile development and how that is applied at Mastercard?
Sure. So I'm going to assume that people want to go from scratch and don't know much about Agile, but Agile started off in the software development industry, and it's really an umbrella term. There's lots of different methodologies that come in under Agile. Some common methodologies are Scrum, Kanban. The one that I'm certified to train in is called Scaled Agile. So the idea of Agile software development is to deliver value in fast increments, and it really focuses on customer feedback, and it's very collaborative. So there's a big aspect of behavior-driven development, as it's called, and focus on people collaborating together. So it's quite different from waterfall, which is the other main methodology you see primarily used in industries such as the building industry, construction, and so forth. So waterfall works really well for projects that are very long running. There's not many variables, not much change. Agile works really well when there's lots of change. So obviously software development is a primary example where there's lots of change. So the idea is that you deliver in short sprints, usually 2-week cycles. You get feedback from the customer, you incorporate that feedback, and then you deliver in the next 2-week increment. So that's basically the bones of it, but there's obviously a lot of, as I said, the collaboration aspect. For Scaled Agile, you scale those principles across the organization. So that's a very potted summary of what Agile is. So how it applies at Mastercard, you asked. Generally, we use Scaled Agile. It's not necessarily used across the board. And within Scaled Agile, they really draw from multiple different types of Agile methodology. So Scrum, Kanban, Lean, if you've heard of Lean, DevOps as well is used. So really whatever is applicable for that team. But Scrumban, which is a combination of Scrum and Kanban, is the one that's used most. So we've started transitioning in the last few years, and it takes a really long time to transition to a new way of working. You think it could be done overnight, but anything like that at scale where it involves changing the culture, the tools, the operational aspects, even teams and roles and responsibilities that change. It's been going on for about 4 or 5 years, but we're finally there. We're moving more towards releasing more quickly, continuous development, CE, CI, CD. But it's a journey, as we always say. So these things don't happen overnight, but generally we're moving there and we're getting much more agile.
Thank you for that. Just moving from the beginning of your career, I guess something that stands out is you work in quite a different field compared to what you studied in your bachelor degree. So how easy or hard was making that switch and the decision to actually do it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I started off studying history. So just for the members of the audience, I did my undergraduate and postgraduate in early modern history. So far cry from what I'm doing now. I did that because I tend to follow my passion. And I'm not saying that's the most scientific way to do these things, but it's just something that's worked for me. And I find that if you do that, it generally works out pretty well because you tend to be good at what you're passionate about. So I started studying history. And then I went traveling around the world, and I ended up in Australia, and I kind of, from happenstance, fell into project management. And it really suited me because I think the variety of work that you have in project and program management, I really liked that. So no 2 days are the same. You work across every area of the project, from budgeting, scheduling, the people side of things. I loved that. So from there, I ended up doing a certification in traditional PMBOK waterfalls type project management. And then later on, I went into Agile, which is quite different. But in terms of how hard that is, I think I'm a firm believer in anything is possible and the growth mindset. if you apply yourself. And I think particularly now, it's so much easier to do that, I think, than it would ever have been. There's so many short courses you can do. Most organizations have learning platforms that you can learn on the job. I think you can learn from other people. I mean, it always amazes me when I see people that I work with, even engineers and architects that don't even have degrees in computer science. And it's something that amazes me because some of them are just so good at what they do. So I think hard skills can always be learned if you apply yourself and if you really have that drive to do it. So yeah, I'm definitely a good example of how you can go into anything really if you really want to and if you have the will, but it definitely takes a lot of work, and you have to be willing to understand that your path might not be linear, that you may have to move sideways, you may have to move backwards to go where you want. But that's my story and that's my experience with it. But I tend to look at other aspects. If I'm interviewing somebody, to me, a certification or qualification, while it's important, I would never say that it's not important, but to me, it's much more about the type of person, their drive, what they're willing to accomplish. I think that's bigger, I think, because I think a lot of the hard skills you can learn.
Brilliant. It looks like you started out in roles related to project delivery. Does that differ from project management?
Not especially. It depends on the organization. So what I was doing in, I think that was Siemens that you're referencing, it was very much the PMBOK style project management. So you have the waterfall. I'm not sure if you study this in your course, but to explain that waterfall, it's based on very distinct phases. So you pass through your analysis phase. You can't go from one phase to the next until you've completed the preceding phase. So you have your analysis phase, your planning, you have your development phase, and then you do your testing after you've completed all of your development. So that aspect of project management is different to agile type of project management. But now, the project delivery is very similar to the PMBOK style project management I would have done in other roles.
Thank you for that. And then I guess, could you tell us about what you're actually doing now with Mastercard in technical project management? What's it like working there? Maybe some of the things that you're working on right now.
Sure. So what I'm doing now, I mean, there's lots of flavors of what a TPM or technical program manager does. So what I do is kind of a niche role within technical program management. So part of my role is an agile coach. So aspects of that would include change management and continuous improvement. So looking at the processes, looking at the structure of how we work and trying to improve that. Looking at lean. I don't know if you know what lean is, but it's really about working in a more efficient way. It actually comes from Toyota manufacturing. So it's all about rooting out single points of failure, rooting out inefficiencies and trying to improve them. So that would be a big aspect of my job now. But I would have aspects of the more traditional technical program management. So managing, we've got features. And again, I'm talking in agile speak, so stop me at any point if you're not sure what I'm talking about. But we break our work into features, which are really value-driven components that we can deliver to a customer, so working functionality. So we break our features into cycles of 8-week cycles per release, but we work in 2-week increments. So we would ideally deliver value in 2-week increments. So I pretty much coach the team. I run the program level ceremonies to make sure we're staying on track. We're doing our demonstrations to show we're delivering value. I run the relentless improvement. And then in terms of some of the things we're working on, well, we work with commercial customers. So what we do is that in my section, we provision virtual card numbers. So what that is that instead of having a plastic card, you can provision virtual cards. So you may have an organization that has one virtual card and you can provision one real card, apologies, and you can provision many virtual cards off that real card. So it's good to prevent fraud. You can also give many of your employees a virtual card number and they can travel. You can put controls on your virtual card as well. So no spending in casinos or, no spending above a certain amount. So there's an ability to do that. So we would sell to commercial banks and they would potentially have their own customers. So that's what we're working on. Some big projects, India on soil, a lot of the on soil project where they're processing within the countries instead of processing within the servers that we would have. GDPR was a big thing that we did as well. There's some of the big projects we've been working on, but we tend to just add enhancements to our platforms as well.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for that. I guess sticking to Mastercard, you've been there for a while. and I guess you've seen what technology has impact technology has had in the sector. What do you expect that the sector is going to keep getting changed immensely thanks to technology? Do you see that certain features are definitely going to get implemented? We've seen a lot of stuff around cryptocurrencies and blockchain that are going to affect the sector definitely. But where do you think that impact is going to take place in finance?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a techie, so I won't go too much in depth about the technology, but definitely you're right. I think cryptocurrency is a big emerging aspect of what we do in fintech and blockchain as well. Biometrics, it's been around for a while, but that's continuing to be a really big part of how people make payments. I suppose with fintech, it's all about balancing convenience with risk, and obviously that's a really big aspect, that you don't want to introduce risk to your customers, but you want to make convenient ways to pay. So biometrics, they're looking at different solutions. I mean, of course, with the emergence of AI, there's going to be very interesting areas, and cryptocurrency, I think that's a very interesting, it's definitely one that's emerging more and more in mainstream financial industry, but I think it's definitely an exciting space to watch, and there's more and more roles being created. I mean, the role that I'm in, the niche role, didn't exist a few years ago, so I think that's going to be happening more and more. And of course, the type of thing that you study, data, that's going to be huge as well. It's just opening up, certainly in our company, it's just opening up, but that's going to be huge.
So just speaking about roles, if you had advice for anyone who's interested in project management in general, and then maybe more specifically Mastercard, what would you say to them?
If you wanted to be a technical program manager, so I think coming from your background, that's definitely an advantage. You have that technical expertise. So a TPM is somebody who has a mixture of technical expertise and project management expertise. So I would say, if possible, to try and get a certification, maybe in Agile project management, if you'd like to work in the tech industry. I'm not a person who says that certifications are a must-have, but if you don't get your certification, you may just have to work that little bit harder. But I think working on your soft skills as well, because I mean, putting it aside that the technical expertise is a given, I think having really good negotiation skills is huge as a TPM. So working on that, having emotional intelligence, because that's a really big aspect of working with teams. As a TPM, you work across multiple different teams, dependencies, you're working with stakeholders, you're managing expectations. You may have a lot of conflicting and competing priorities from stakeholders and work coming into the funnel, and a lot of companies, they have so much work in the backlog, and the budget is restricted, so you're going to have work being pushed onto your board, and one of the key responsibilities of TPM is to manage that and protect their team. So, and being accountable and proactive. So if you can work on those skills, maybe you have them naturally, which is great, but putting yourself into situations where you can work on those skills and really kind of work that muscle. But definitely the soft skills are a huge thing in becoming a TPM. And I think you probably have the technical expertise down already. But Mastercard, I mean, I know there's intern programs for Mastercard. They're recruiting actively. Of course, with coronavirus, there was a big impact, but Mastercard are constantly recruiting. We're growing a lot in Dublin, so definitely keep an eye on the roles.
Thanks for that. We have a question in the chat which is very related to what you just answered, Sam, if you put it up there. It's so again, it's asking about the key skills that you're looking for when interviewing. I think you touched on most of them, but is there anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, good question, Emma. Definitely, I think, as I mentioned before, for me, it's not that I don't look at the hard skills and I don't look at the qualifications, because they're definitely important, but I think I look more so for the type of person, so how they communicate, what perspective they might bring. And I know, which is great, diversity is becoming much bigger and much more prominent in organizations, but I try to put myself in a position where, and it's hard, but you're not looking for somebody just like yourself. So you're trying to bring a diverse perspective on the team. And I know obviously that's not something you can work on, but I think if you can, be authentic and really show who you are, there's usually one thing or several things that you're really good at that possibly your peers will never be as good at as you. If you can make that shine in an interview, and for me, that always makes me remember a candidate. If they can have that spark, make that one thing that they're really good at shine and show that enthusiasm, I think for me, that's really the standout thing. But of course, show if you don't necessarily have the qualifications and you may be going up against other candidates that do, show that you have a willingness to learn, that maybe you're doing some learning, short courses online, or that you've got a mentor, anything that shows that you're motivated. I think that really stands out. And obviously great communication is always a plus. I hope that answered your question, Emma.
And then we had a follow-up question here from Adam. He asked, I guess you touched on this one earlier, but if there was anything you'd like to add on particular computer languages or tech skills that teams at Mastercard might use on a daily basis?
Yeah, so in my program, it's Java. There's obviously different programs. I wouldn't be as familiar with them, but that's a big thing in our program. I can't really comment on other things, but yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be emerging technologies, and we have a lab section in Mastercard that would be more cutting edge, I suppose, with what they use, but on our program, it's Java. Sorry, I can't answer in more technical detail, Adam.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. I guess moving onto more, career kind of advice. So this is a question I really like to ask most people. What were the biggest surprises of your career, and what do you enjoy most about what you do?
Great question. So the biggest surprise, I think probably while I was working in the more traditional area of project management. So I trained in the PMBOK waterfall style, and I was a true believer. I really thought that it worked well, and it's quite a rigid methodology. So I kind of thought, if you plan a project really well, and you have all the details, and of course there's going to be some change, but it should be pretty foolproof. But I learned over the years that it's not necessarily the case. I've worked on projects where we spent a really long time working and even delivering something, and then the market changes, particularly in the technology world. Things change all the time. There's maybe new specifications. The customer has changed their mind. It's really hard to keep up. So you could spend a year delivering something, and then it comes back and you've got to scrap everything and deliver it again. So I was kind of in that transition phase when I was introduced to Agile, and I'm going to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical about it at first. Some of it sounds a bit off the wall, and it honestly sounds a bit counterintuitive. This thing of embracing change and being willing to constantly look at changing and embracing customer feedback, and some of the methodology, because it's quite a gray area in comparison to waterfall, it can feel a bit uncomfortable. So when the opportunity was presented to change from project manager to Scrum Master, which is the role primarily in Agile, a similar role, but not quite, I was skeptical about it. I had this idea of clinging on to the idea of being a project manager, but I said, I'm going to take up the opportunity, see how it goes. And honestly, it was the best thing I've ever done. So it did teach me a big lesson about saying yes, being more open, and it put me on the path that I'm on now. I obviously really embraced Agile. I thought it worked so well. And when I really was embedded into it and saw it working, I really could see the value of it. So I ended up becoming an Agile trainer and now working coaching teams in Agile. So that was definitely the biggest surprise. The second part of your question, Ahmed, what was that?
It was, what do you enjoy most about your job or your career in general?
Yeah, I would say the relentless improvement aspect of it, the change management, and I suppose let me add to that, it's probably the more difficult part, but the part that I enjoy the most. So I think looking at how we could work better, improving our processes, making things more efficient. It's definitely slower than you'd expect it to be, because you have an idea of improving a process and you think it should just change. But of course, there's tools and people and culture. But I really am passionate about that. That's something that I do even if I don't have to do it in a job. So I think that's always a good indication of what you're passionate about. So I would say change management, definitely.
And this next question, I guess you sort of touched on already when you said you changed your attitude towards Agile and everything. But I guess if you could give yourself some advice 10 years ago, what might have you done differently, or what would you say to yourself to do differently?
Well, that would certainly be one of the pieces of advice, would be to say yes more and be open to change, because I think I'm quite goal focused. So I have a goal and I have something in mind and I'm quite driven towards that goal. But I think that was a big lesson for me. It taught me that things can come up and you can have blinkers on when you're so focused on a goal, and an opportunity can come if you're not leaving the door open a crack for that. Sometimes you can miss them. So that was a big lesson learned for me. So I think saying yes, I've done that a lot more. You've got to be careful with that, obviously not volunteering yourself for too many things, but I think that's the one piece of advice. It kind of worked out in the end, but I think being open to new opportunities, embracing change more. As I said, there's so many new roles and teams and areas and categories of working that didn't exist, and that's going to keep happening at an exponential rate. So I guess you may have an idea in mind that you have a certain career that you want to do or a certain job, but just keep your mind open that there might be other opportunities, things you've never considered.
Brilliant. So we have a question here from Eva. She asks, does Mastercard have any educational or training programs for new hires?
Yeah, I have to say Mastercard is one of the best companies I've ever worked for just investing in their staff, and education is a huge thing, Eva. So there's a great intern program at Mastercard. They've got an intern committee. Mastercard has an online learning platform. They really heavily invest in that, but there is an intern program where they work intensively with the interns. So obviously integrating the interns into the company and the culture. But the online learning platforms are huge. So there is a huge focus, and we're given specified time throughout the month just to focus on learning and education. So whether that's a certification that you want to do offline, Mastercard will help to pay for that. There's actually a lot of certifications you can do. We've access to Plural Site and other learning platforms. So I have to say it's really good for that. And they're very supportive in terms of career growth, and definitely one of the best companies I've ever seen for that. So if you decide in the morning that you want to do something completely different, I've seen people change to completely different roles, and they're very supportive. So it's great in that respect as well.
Thanks for that. We have another question in the chat actually from Ben, who's asking, are there difficulties in scaling an Agile/Scrum approach to large complex projects?
Very good question. So in terms of when you say large projects, so longer term projects tend to do better. So I'm just talking about timeline initially. Longer term projects do better with Agile. There's a misconception that large projects work better with waterfall. And the reason for that is that the larger a project and the longer a project is that there's more unknowns, and Agile works much better with change and unknowns, whereas waterfall isn't very flexible or rigid. So that's why Agile works better with longer term projects. But scaled Agile is one of the scaled solutions. There's a few out there, but that's the one that I work with. But that's one of the solutions that we use to scale across when we're talking about large projects, so programs and across the enterprise. So it does help to solve that, because I think it's a good question, because Agile and Scrum and Kanban, they tend to solve the problem at a team level. So they work really well for one development team. But as soon as you start adding development teams and adding programs that might have dependencies with each other, teams tend to fall back on a waterfall type process for multiple teams. So scaled Agile takes the principles that you use and the ceremonies that you use at a team level, and it scales them up. So it's a pretty good solution. It takes time to roll out. Any change at scale takes time, but I would say SAFe is one of the better solutions to handle that. Great question.
Thanks for that. Back to my questions. So I think I saw a research paper a few weeks ago that said that people that are graduating now are likely to change careers like up to 10 times. You have gone through a few career changes. So again, you touched on this at the beginning of this event. But what advice would you give to those new graduates in terms of adapting to those career changes? Because again, many people do struggle with a complete change. You've done that before, so what advice would you have?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a hard question because I think it's the mindset thing. So, and I think change is hard, and I've definitely come across this where, maybe some people embrace it more naturally, but I think definitely learning as much as you can. And I think most organizations you'll go into, as I said, they'll have that opportunity where you can either learn from other teams, and they have programs where you can spend some time working in another team. And I know Mastercard has that, but I'm sure other organizations has that. So I think keep that mindset of trying out new things, because I think I don't know about you, but when I was your age, and even now, I'm sure it's so hard to know what you want to do for your whole career. It's such a long period of time, and things change and new opportunities come up. So I'd say at least keep your mind open to trying new things. Learn as much as you can, because the more you learn, you'll find something, maybe that a nugget of information or a new area that you find interesting. But I think it's the world that we live in, so to resist it is kind of futile. And I found that, particularly if you work in the technology industry, it's so fast paced and fast changing, but that's exciting because, you know, you don't know what your niche is, and there may be several things that you do and you evolve into, and there's many exciting opportunities out there. So why close yourself off? So I would say it's definitely a mindset thing, but I think the more you experience it and the more positive experiences you get from it, I think you realize that it's good to have that openness. But yeah, having mentors in other fields is really good as well. And I think having a mentor in general, if you don't have one, I would say definitely get one. I left it way too late to have a mentor. But having a mentor in a field that maybe you're not familiar with, and having conversations with colleagues and people that are from different areas, because you may find something that you're really passionate about.
So I think this is one of our last questions. As someone who's worked in a number of different companies of different sizes and in different countries even, how important do you think it is to find a company who you feel that you fit in with the culture? You know, how do work cultures vary? And do you think that's an important aspect for new graduates?
I think it's really important. It's a really good question. So I think the first part of your question, so is it important, or how important is it to find one that fits with you? I think it's so important. But for me personally, I think the team that I work with and the atmosphere that I work with and the ability to feel like it can be authentic, that's almost as important as the type of work that I do. So it's definitely the thing that motivates you, feels you can, you feel you can be yourself, you can express yourself. There's inclusion, which is a really, important part of diversity that we don't talk about. So I think extremely important. And obviously it'll vary per company. But yeah, I've worked in Australia, I've worked in a few different places, and I've worked in organizations that are much more global. I think there's much more of a push to recognize that company culture is important now. But I think definitely don't ignore that. If you're working somewhere and you don't feel you can be yourself, then I think that's definitely something to consider. But I think it could end up holding you back if you feel like you can't express yourself. If you feel like you're not going to thrive in that environment, it's huge.
Brilliant. So I think unless there's any last minute questions coming through, Ahmed, have you got anything you'd like to go over?
I think that's everything. But before we end this, I think we have to appreciate the new mugs, Sam. So thanks for that, Sam. So all right, yeah, there's a thanks in the chat. So I guess we'll wrap up here. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new speaker. So thank you very much, Aideen, for joining us today, and thank you for everyone watching.
Thank you, Aideen. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks all.